Hello and welcome to Missouri Legislative Update. This month we bring you our program from the floor of the Missouri House of Representatives. In this month's show, we take a look at the final days of the 2014 legislative session. I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives.
And reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Jennifer Yapel. From voting and veterans to education and the economy, here are some of the major Senate bills that passed during the 2014 legislative session, many of which await the governor's action. This year, the Senate tackled several measures pertaining to education, including one that is the culmination of bipartisan legislation coming together in order to reform Missouri's school accreditation and student transfer process. Another bill relating to education focuses on colleges and universities. Senate Bill 492, sponsored by Senator David Pierce of Warrensburg, would require the creation of a performance-based funding model for higher education institutions in Missouri.
We have basically evolved when it comes to our funding for higher education. Some 30 states are going to performance funding, and Missouri should and could be in the mix to do that.
Several Senate bills relating to economic development were delivered to the governor. Senate Bill 731, sponsored by Senator Jamila Nasheed of St. Louis, addresses nuisance properties that affect the value of any property in a neighborhood and outlines what happens when someone fails to maintain that property.
And it goes a long way to really improve neighborhoods, not just in the city of St. Louis, but throughout the state of Missouri.
And then there was legislation passed by the General Assembly, vetoed by the governor, and approved once again by the legislature by overriding the governor's veto. Senate Bills 509 and 496, sponsored by Senator Will Kraus of Lee Summit, is known as a broad-based tax relief bill designed to reduce tax credits for individuals and small businesses throughout the Show Me State. Legislation designed to streamline Missouri's statutes regarding crimes and punishments was passed by the General Assembly and enacted into law. Senate Bill 491, co-sponsored by Senate Minority Floor Leader Julie Justice of Kansas City and Senator Bob Dixon of Springfield, creates new classes of felonies and misdemeanors, reorganizes crimes to fit new penalties in state statutes, and ensures that crimes count toward repeat offenders' enhanced sentences.
It's one of the reasons that the current criminal code is broken, because we don't have these protections in place. So I just wanted to take a minute to thank you for your work on that and make sure that everybody in the chamber knew and everyone outside of the chamber that this is an unprecedented opportunity to get tough on crime.
Consumer protection legislation found its way to the governor. The legislature passed a bill that changes Missouri's laws relating to alternative nicotine or vapor products, such as electronic cigarettes. Senate Bill 841, sponsored by Senator Jay Wasson of Nixa, prohibits the sale of alternative nicotine products or vapor products to those under the age of 18.
What is in these things is nicotine. It is not tobacco. They don't get the carcinogenic stuff that you get when you smoke a cigarette, but they get a really high dose of nicotine, and a kid messing with these things could easily get hooked on nicotine and then graduate on up to smoking.
Health and wellness was also a focus of the General Assembly this year. Senator Dan Brown of Raleigh sponsored Senate Bill 639, which addresses those Missourians who receive screenings for breast cancer, allowing these individuals to receive information that could let them know if their dense breast tissue might hide abnormalities and could benefit from supplemental screenings. A bill sponsored by Senator Ryan Silvey of Kansas City ensures insurance companies provide affordable coverage for oral chemotherapy. It was signed by the governor earlier this year. Senate Bill 668 provides for a more affordable and accessible option to patients in need of this medication.
From the patient advocates, who are certainly, in my opinion, the most important group in this struggle, but also the insurance industry and the pharmaceutical industry have all come together and agreed that this is a solution that makes sense.
Public assistance measures passed by the legislature include Senate Bill 680, sponsored by Senator Shalom Kiki Curls of Kansas City. Her measure lifts the lifetime ban against those who have felony drug convictions in order to receive food stamp benefits.
This additional assistance for those that are trying to do the right thing, have served their time, is really important when these individuals are trying to establish economic stability and get back on their feet.
A bill designed to honor our state's veterans expands medallion programs that honor various members of our armed forces and creates new programs for those who served in Operations Iraqi Freedom, New Dawn, Desert Shield, and Desert Storm. In addition, schools are required to conduct educational programs and activities as part of a Veterans Day celebration. Senate Bill 600, sponsored by Senator David Sater of Cassville, still awaits the governor's signature. To see a complete list of truly agreed to and finally passed Senate bills and the governor's actions on these measures, visit senate.mo.gov. After the final gavel fell, Senate leaders met for an end-of-session press conference. Here are some of their remarks.
It's been a tremendous year, and 2014 has, as far as, that's why I highlighted the areas in which we work together. The criminal code hasn't been done in 30 years. The education reform policy, I mean, decades since we've tackled that type of reform, and we did it together.
It is a continual frustration not only to the Democrats in the Missouri Senate, but also to many hundreds of thousands of people across the state of Missouri that we were not able to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. This is an opportunity that we believe is not only important when it comes to bringing health care to hundreds of thousands of citizens across the state, but it also is a job creator and something that businesses, hospitals, poverty advocates, folks all across the state have gathered together and said, this is something that we can do.
For the first time in around 30 years, Senator Justice and many of those who helped, we redid the criminal code. I think that's noteworthy. For the first time in 30 years, or over 30 years, we've had education reform, what Senator Dempsey talked about on the transfer bill. And for the first time in 100 years, we have tax revision.
The Missouri House of Representatives wrapped up the 2014 legislative session by putting its stamp of approval on more than 185 pieces of legislation. Following the session's final gavel, both parties claimed 2014 as a victory. The sound of paper hitting the ground signaled the end of the 2014 legislative session for the Missouri House. Members of the Missouri House put their final stamp of approval on more than 185 pieces of legislation.
As we brought the session to a close, I was proud to see how hard my colleagues had worked together to collaborate, to build consensus, to cheerfully bring so many of our priorities across the finish line and send them to the governor.
Despite all of the accomplishments, the Speaker points to the successful override of the governor's veto of Senate Bill 509 as the crowning achievement of the 2014 legislative session.
This session was highlighted by an historic veto override of historic tax reduction and reform legislation that will finally allow Missouri families and businesses to keep more of their hard-earned dollars.
On the other side of the aisle, House Democrats also claimed the legislative session a success, but for different reasons.
We beat paycheck, we beat right to work. Number one priority for the Speaker, Lieutenant Governor, went down in flames.
Despite defeating these bills, the minority were not able to push Medicaid expansion across the finish line.
This is something that I just believe is inevitable. It's going to happen at some point. We've again failed to create 24,000 jobs. We've held ideology over people getting health insurance.
I was very happy, and I'm sure my caucus was, to cheerfully stand in the way of dumping $1 billion of taxpayer money into a very broken Medicaid system.
Lawmakers now watch and wait for the governor's actions on all of the bills passed in 2014. Members of the Missouri House and Senate will return to the capital city on September 10th for the annual veto session to deal with any legislation vetoed by the governor. Following the break, one of the state's top newsmakers sits down with the Speaker of the Missouri House to discuss the 2014 legislative session. That's after these messages on Missouri Legislative Update.
Traditional light bulbs actually generate 9 times more heat than light. Let's switch to Energy Star light bulbs and stop burning through cash. Saving energy saves you money.
Welcome to Capitol Dialogue. I'm Bob Priddy with the Missourinet and the Missouri Channel. We're glad to have you with us. The legislative session of 2014 has come to an end. The House chamber behind us is now quiet. But just a few days ago, it was filled with passion, heat, debate, arguments, and decisions that are important to every citizen of the state of Missouri. Our guest on this program is the Speaker of the House, Tim Jones. It's not often that we've had speakers of the House on our show with us, so we're glad to have you here. And you have, I guess you're pretty much done as Speaker now, except for a few ceremonial things later in the year.
Perhaps. We'll see if we have a special session or an active veto session this year.
Well, that will be some things we want to talk about.
Yes.
But tell me a little bit about a career as Speaker. Looking back over these 2 years, they've been pretty tumultuous, active years.
You know, we probably say that about every speakership because there's always excitement, there's always passionate debate, there's always big issues and challenges to tackle. But I think this year we saw the conclusion of a very significant substantive session. Many major priorities made it across the finish line.
Let's talk about the top priorities as you see them. Give me a list of maybe the 5 most important things you think happened in this legislative session.
Well, the income tax reform and reduction was historical in the sense that it's the first time we've reduced and reformed the state income tax in nearly 100 years, and we did it by overriding the governor's veto. So that was a dramatic step, I believe, towards some significant economic development in the state. We also did a major completion of a major project for Fulton Mental Health Hospital. That has been something that's embattled this legislature for not just years but decades. That's a project that was well overdue. I'm very proud of the fact this legislature came together to complete that. There was a significant infrastructure bill that Representative Chris Kelly and I worked on that he called the most significant jobs bill that he's seen in his entire tenure, which is saying something because he's been here a couple different times over the last few decades. And that was a historical bill as well. The budget is our one constitutional substantive duty, and I think it's easier said than done on that. We passed a significant budget with a historical increase for education. I believe it was around $200 million or more for education this year, so significant priority placed in that arena. And it was a great year for the children of the state. There was a significant school transfer bill that passed through, and I was speaking to one of our child advocates just yesterday, and she said there was some major funding items in the budget. There was just a lot of good things for Missouri kids this year as well, so a good year.
You talked about the override of the governor's veto on the tax bill, the income tax reform bill. And it's been portrayed not only over in this chamber, the House of Representatives, but in the Senate as a key to economic development. Tell me how this works and how long is it going to take for the state to get back through economic development the amount of money it is going to give back to the citizens because of the tax cut?
Well, the great beauty about this bill is not a single dollar is going to come out of the current record high state budget of $27+ billion because this is truly it's a revenue accelerator bill. So what I mean by that is no revenue will go back in the form of a tax cut to the taxpayers until additional revenue comes in first. So the state budget will never lose any revenue. What I think that this bill will do is it will work in conjunction with the other states around us that are pursuing similar measures and will put Missouri in that competitive stream. Many of our other states are reducing taxes. 6 of our 8 bordering states are right-to-work states. Many of our states are reforming their litigation systems and their regulatory burdens. If Missouri is not competitive in all of those arenas, then we will lag behind. And that's true currently because Missouri ranks 47th in GDP growth in the nation. So I think a historic tax cut like this is a signal to business owners in Missouri and outside of Missouri that Missouri is open for business. And so as additional revenue comes in, taxpayer money will go back to small businesses and Missouri workers.
So it's your thought that the tax cut has a lot of ripples. We talk about the tax cut itself, but there's a lot of related things that we'll feel that come out from it.
Yes, economics is always a ripple effect, and you have to incentivize in order to see growth. And I think this bill will be a huge incentive to growth.
The legislature and the governor collided on several things, including this bill this year, but it seemed like the Fulton State Hospital was something everybody agreed on. It was just making the right agreement to go in the right direction. How hard was it to actually figure out how you want to go about funding a new state hospital in Fulton?
Well, we made the process easier by working with our Senate colleagues. The governor's plan was something we reviewed, but we decided to go with the joint House-Senate plan, which actually will complete the project in a much faster period of time. It will incur much less debt for the state and for taxpayers, and we'll get the project done within about 5 within about 3 years with a debt payoff of only 5 years. So that's really a monumental accomplishment, and is something that, like I said, is long overdue.
It's long overdue. It's a major institution, but at the same time, I'm sure there's a lot of Missourians who don't really feel touched by this issue. How important is it to the whole state of Missouri?
This is an institution that is available to anyone in the state who needs its services, and it has provided it has been a vital component of the mental health community in our entire state. So as we reach out to our most vulnerable citizens, we should have the right facilities and services for them. Rebuilding Fulton Mental Health into a state-of-the-art facility was long overdue and will be a resource available to every Missourian who's in need.
Now that's the gem of the infrastructure proposal. There's a lot of other things you folks took care of this year in terms of funding for other infrastructure projects that have been neglected for a long, long time. Let's run through those and talk about how important it was that you move in that direction with them.
You know, there was, I don't have the laundry list with me, but it was an important list, as you mentioned. And it was a list that Representative Chris Kelly and I worked on collaboratively for about 3 to 4 years. It will create immediate construction jobs, and then it will create long-term employment opportunities as well for all Missourians in areas of education, in areas of health care, in areas of economic development.
School transfer bill was something that was high on the list at the beginning of the year. You got the bill through. The governor has some reservations about it. But is that an important bill just for St. Louis and Kansas City, or does that have tentacles that reach throughout Missouri?
Our public education system affects every student in the state who attends public schools. And we have to stop thinking that every school district is an island and that they only have to worry about themselves. We need to worry about the state of education for the entire state of Missouri, for every child. And I was very proud to join with my colleagues in the Senate, the 3 ladies who led the charge over there, Senators Maria Chappelle-Nadal, Jamila Nasheed, and Kiki Curls, whose Senate districts are some of the most impacted by our failing schools in Missouri. They see it firsthand. They see the circle of failure. They want to create a circle of success. They want to rebuild their neighborhoods. And the important part of that is to have competitive schools that do an excellent job. And this is the first significant key. This is the first time we've gotten a bill like this through the legislature ever that provides some degree of hope, opportunity, and choice for parents.
Tendency is to think of this as a metropolitan area problem, St. Louis and Kansas City. But we have several schools in outstate Missouri that are teetering on the verge of being unaccredited and facing some of these same issues. Is this also something that could have a major impact to the people in rural Missouri too?
I think it could be a viable and helpful use to them. I hope those schools are able to turn things around, but you're correct. If you speak to our rural legislators, they will tell you that the issues of education, the challenges in education, do not just affect the urban and suburban areas, but there are some rural schools that are challenged as well. And so I think we've provided a good toolbox of available resources for every school district in the state, so every child has access to a great education, which was a priority of mine these last 2 years.
But you know from being around here that those of us in the press like to talk about the things you don't do.
Correct.
Right? And so there's a couple of things that didn't happen this year. One was, once again, no tax credit reform to speak of. Is this something the legislature is just going to talk about forever?
I would say the House continually shows that this is a chief priority for us. We passed out a major economic development bill that included huge amounts of tax credit reform very, very early in the session. I think it went out of this chamber in February or early March. It gave the Senate plenty of opportunity. I think there's a couple people in the General Assembly that are always moving the dial around on that issue and never seem to be satisfied with any proposal. So perhaps in the years to come, when there's other hands at the table and other minds being brought to bear, there can be a good compromise. But the House has passed out, in my time, numerous bills that have lowered the caps on some of the biggest drivers, eliminated 20 to 30 tax credit programs, substantial savings of over $100 million every year. So the House continues, I think, to lead on this. We welcome our Senate partners to join us.
And the other issue that was big at the start that the House acted on and the Senate did not was Medicaid reform and expansion this year. You folks moved some bills on that.
Well, we said that reform has to be the chief priority, and there were several bills that moved through courtesy of some of our legislators on both sides of the aisle that worked on the issue. You know, I think the problem with Medicaid expansion is that we're seeing states that have done that now that are now having fiscal challenges. There was a major write-up this week in one of our major national papers that talked about how states are now having to come to grips with this Medicaid expansion because of Obamacare's effects on that. So I think we were cautious and wise in having a debate on the issue, talking about reform. The fact that that an expansion bill did not pass I think actually I'm glad we did not pass a straight expansion bill. There has to be reform to this system. Every healthcare provider tells you that.
When we return, we continue our review of the 2014 legislative session with Senator Paul LeVota of Independence. Stay tuned.
9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans. If you see someone in danger of starting a wildfire, step in and make a difference. Because 9 out of 10 wildfires can be prevented.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome to the well of the state Senate. Just a few weeks ago, this was a very busy place. Now it's kind of an empty place, and we talk about what happened in the time between January and the middle of May, and the legislative session just passed. Our guest is Paul LeVota, a state senator from Independence. This is your first term in the state Senate after moving over from the House after a long career in term limit times over in the House of Representatives. Had a number of major issues that had to be dealt with this year. Let's talk about a few of them that we had to deal with. First of all, the main thing that the legislature has to do right out of the box is deal with the budget, deal with funding education, deal with paying the state debt. We're in pretty good shape as far as our state debts are concerned, aren't we?
Well, you know, we're in pretty good shape when it comes to that. We actually had one of the easier budget years that I've seen, relatively easy, as our revenues raised a bit. The problem is what's going to happen when we go into the next few years. There was a massive tax cut for the very high end of Missourians. We'll be getting a tax break, and that will hurt our revenues up to $650 million a year. And so that's really going to be a pressure on what we can do going further in the budget, and we won't have as much ease as we did this year with the budget.
But the idea behind the tax cut is that none of those cuts kick in until income has gone to a certain level. So we're still going to be on the plus side by the time all of them kick in.
We'll be on a plus side, but the trigger is a little ridiculous because its natural growth is higher than the trigger. And we currently do not fully fund the foundation formula. We currently have a proposal to increase sales tax for the transportation infrastructure. So what we did with that massive tax cut is a bad thing for our state. It hurts the revenues and it'll hurt our budget going forward.
Part of the tax cut was a 2-year delay in it going into effect, presumably so that the legislature could fully fund the school foundation formula. If you were putting money down on a bet that you were going to fully fund the formula within 2 years, would you put money on that line?
I don't think that bill required that it be fully funded. I think it was just we would like to, but you know, if there was a will of this General Assembly to fully fund the foundation formula, we would have done it many years ago when we made that commitment to not only the people of Missouri, but the children of Missouri.
You were in the legislature when that commitment was made?
Yes.
Are you disappointed that it hasn't been carried out?
I'm very disappointed. Missourians should be very disappointed in this General Assembly because that commitment was made and it's not being followed through with. And every year we say, oh, we have more money for education than we did last year, but the commitment that the General Assembly made to the people of Missouri is that formula number, and we're still well behind that.
You're a member of the minority party, a distinct minority in the legislature. Do you ever get the feeling that the majority party, which is 2-1, can just kind of steamroller you if you want?
They have done that on things. I think as far as their steamrolling, it hasn't really been with issues that they want to pass, except for the massive tax cut, but it's been more of a holding up the things that are good for Missouri, particularly Medicaid expansion. We had an opportunity to expand Medicaid this year for the second year in a row, pull in that federal money, help our citizens with our federal tax money. And again, not part of the conversation in this General Assembly because the majority is against that.
Now, on one of our previous programs, we had one of the House budget people say that the reason we didn't expand Medicaid this year was because we can't afford the $200 million or so that the state of Missouri is going to have to pay as its contribution down the road.
I don't know who said that. They're making up numbers, because clearly if you look at the savings, the money that comes in for 10 years, we don't have to expend any part of our general revenue number. In fact, if we would have done it this year, and I tried this amendment in a budget process, we would have freed up $94 million in general revenue that we could put towards schools and bring the other money that taxpayers like you and I pay to the federal government, pull it in and help cover 300,000 people and save 700 people's lives a year.
Even though your party's outnumbered 2-1 in the legislature, what do you think your party accomplished this year?
Well, I think there's things that could have been really destructive to the state that hurt the middle class, like a so-called right to work, picking on public employees through a paycheck deception, some things that would hurt disenfranchised voters, some of the proposals. Some of those things were stopped by our minority caucus, and simply because we know that's not good for Missouri, and we fought to stop those things.
How do you think the overall relationship in terms of working together, though, was this year?
Despite all that, I think it's good. I think that there needs to be probably more discussion about the goals of the Senate ongoing, at more of the beginning of the session, so we know where we're going on throughout a year. But I would say pretty good. I think the President Pro Temp and the floor leader have always felt with their commitments, whether I agree with them or not. They're men of their word and followed through on their commitments. And I think the minority leader, Jolie Justice, did an amazing job of respecting the Senate, but also having a strong minority voice.
Speaking of Jolie Justice, she was the main sponsor of the criminal code bill.
Yes.
And that has to be one of the major accomplishments of this session.
Yeah, I mean, that's where outside groups, prosecutors, defense lawyers, the bar, victims of crimes got together and worked for many years to put this together. And it was one of those times in the Senate that we worked together to say this is what's best for our state, that we revise this criminal code and we can go forward with that.
You're not a lawyer. How did somebody who's a non-lawyer deal with a massive issue like that is so technical in the law?
I think not only on this issue, but many other issues, you have to rely on your fellow senators and their expertise. And some of the experts on this one, it was prosecutors and defense attorneys getting their expertise, guiding me on this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. And really the word of our minority leader, who's done a great job of explaining this, and she spent a whole day explaining it to the members, and I think that goes a long way for someone not burdened with a law degree to understand it.
Do we need more lawyers in the legislature? Because we don't have very many.
I hear that a lot. I think attorneys really add a good input to the General Assembly. It may be good to have more lawyers. I know the general public thinks that we're all lawyers, but that's not the case. I think having lawyers, doctors, facilitators, whatever it may be, a cross-section of Missouri is the best way to go.
So what do you think now as we look ahead to 2015? What do you see as the big challenges that you and your colleagues will face in 2015?
Well, I think Medicaid expansion is still something we need to continue to try to do. We all have one more year, we can get 100% matching. Also, things like looking at a minimum wage and a livable wage for folks is a really important concept we should talk about. And some of the ethics reform that we didn't get done this year, particularly having campaign finance limits, is something that we really need to give to the people of Missouri.
And that's our show for this month. If you have any questions about the legislation that appeared in this program, please visit our website at senate.mo.gov. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate.
And I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives. If you have any questions regarding anything going on in the Missouri House or its members, you can visit our website at house.mo.gov. For all of us with Missouri Legislative Update, thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again next month as we continue to bring you the sights and sounds of the Missouri General Assembly.